we're fine. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Call the roll, please.
Peddle,
Here?
Golden,
Here.
Tarzinski,
Here.
Conlon, Burbick, Neely,
Here.
Parch.
Here.
5 present.
Okay, we do have a quorum. Next, on to the minutes of the October 27th meeting. Do I have a move to approve, a motion to approve?
What is that?
Ms. Neely?
Thank you.
Okay, do I have a second? And then I have some changes.
Oh, great, that was,
Okay.
I have some changes.
Second, okay, Ms. Neely?
Thank you.
Dr. Neely?
Whichever. Just don't call me late for supper, right?
Okay.
Okay, on the second page of the minutes, which is page 3 of the packet, a notice made that I indeed left 4 minutes before the break. Ooh. But I came back at the end of the break, and it's even shown in here that I was the person that moved to adjourn. So would it be possible to put something in about that either everyone returned from the break or I returned from the break and didn't skip town or something?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point, yeah. If we're going to note that you left everyone returned from the break. Did you have something else?
No, I'm done.
Okay. On the same page, up under Elizabeth Hennessy, William Blair, that the reference to my comment is incorrect. Yeah, it's there's a number of ways that we can clarify. The levy is for tax year 2015 and collected in it's not,
Calendar.
Do tax.
and collected in calendar year 2016.
Yeah.
Okay. 2016 in the law refers to tax year 2016. 2017 in the law refers to tax year 2017. So I think that probably is a sufficient clarification. That will become material with respect to some of the issues tonight, so.
Say that again. what
Yes,
you said.
so the information is for levy 2015, that's fine, for tax year 2015, collected in calendar year 2016.
And- and
Then you go forward and say, in the legislation, 2016 refers to tax year 2016, and 2017 refers to tax year 2017.
And I don't know if we want to say, but it is for the fiscal year 17 city budget, which
I
doesn't
don't
mean much
think
to
we
anybody
want
but
to,
us.
I don't think we want to get messed up in that, simply because on the agenda tonight, we do have the issue of changing the fiscal year. And so I don't want to start, it's confusing enough as it is.
Yes.
Okay,
Agreed.
it is factual that no matter what, we're talking about the tax years 15, 16, and 17. And how that works out, we know that the calendar year in which the taxes will be collected, we don't know necessarily which city fiscal year that will be, depending on a lot of other things.
Yep.
So. Other corrections or additions to the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor of the minutes as corrected, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, then let's move on ahead into the agenda for tonight. I'd like to make a couple of comments before we move into the agenda, some for the benefit of the committee and some for the benefit of anybody who is watching live or will watch the meeting later. First of all, I would encourage anyone listening in the public to look at the backup for tonight's meeting. I find that the backup for tonight's meeting has been prepared with new information from the last time that we met, and it, in my opinion, is very, very thorough with respect to the questions that have to be posed and have to be answered. And from my reading, which I admit was quick, I think you will see a relatively even-handed and objective presentation of the issues at hand. So I would encourage people to look at that backup. That backup includes an interpretation from Chapman and Cutler, a leading local government law firm, regarding the PTEL legislation, the Property Tax Extension Limitation Law, and it answers some questions that the committee and I think the general public probably had with respect to that particular issue. And the final point that I want to make is that on our agenda is not the fiscal year 2016 budget. The fiscal year 2016 budget was adopted in June of 2015. There have been some questions regarding specific line items in that budget, which we will certainly try to answer for citizens, but our agenda at this particular point in time is a forward-looking agenda that is related to the tax levy for tax year 2015, collectible in 2016, the effect of the Moody's ratings report, and then I believe when you talk about the budget year-end change, you're talking about change in the fiscal year? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so that's our agenda, and we did not have time to complete that to the point of recommendation the last time. Before beginning the discussion, can we have a report on what the City Council chose to do with respect to the estimated levy?
So last night, we brought the estimated levy in front of the City Council. As has been in the previous year, that estimate is a ceiling. The City Council can always levy lower than that amount, but they can never levy higher than that amount. Knowing that we were still talking at the Finance Committee level, we set that estimate at the highest possible. So it included.
So every option is available that was available to us the
Exactly.
last time. All right, thank you. All right. With that in mind, I guess we will start with the Moody's October 15 ratings report. Is there any commentary from staff?
I did include, this is exactly what was included in the last time, in your last packet, just to keep it refreshed in your mind, and certainly if there's any questions about it, we can certainly go through it. I would like to reiterate, though, that the city's bond rating has not changed. It's a AA2, and it's an excellent bond rating. The negative outlook that is attached was attached based on criteria Moody's has developed, so.
Okay. I don't know, are there additional questions or additional discussion that people want to have at this particular point in time about the bond rating or the outlook from Moody's?
Just a point, if I could, Mike.
Sure.
I took the opportunity to follow up with Elizabeth regarding one of the questions about where we stood relative to other cities and so forth that Moody's rates. And I was particularly interested in finding out how many changes they may have made, and I didn't get that quite, but she did report back a document that is published by Moody's that provides the information about it, and I'll just read. They have a section for counties, they have a section for cities and villages, and they have a section for school districts. For us, I think we're interested in cities and villages, and they have columns AAA, AA, and A for cities and villages. And in there, they have a total rating of 143 entities. 16 out of 143 are AAA. So out of 143, there's only 16 that are AAA, and those would be the only 16 out of 143 that would be rated higher than the city of DeKalb. So relatively speaking, despite the headline and some of the information and the misspeak, I too would reiterate for the good of the folks watching that we retain a very high level rating, and I guess that's would put you in the top 85 percentile group anyway, so.
And it should be noted that subsequent to our last meeting, the university's bond rating was actually lowered. And there's actually been a fair amount of attention to this particular issue in the media, including the Chicago Tribune. Before we continue our discussion of the 2015 tax levy, I would like to pick up a story that was published in the Chicago Tribune and some of its suburban publications about the city of Elgin and the way that they're having to deal with the very same issues. First of all, with respect to the issue of extension of the property, with respect to the issue of making non-home rule municipalities and all counties in Illinois, not just a subset, subject to the property tax extension limitation law. This issue that we are discussing in the Finance Advisory Committee and in the city of DeKalb is one that is present for every home rule jurisdiction. This is a very, very serious issue with respect to the finances of home rule jurisdictions who have not previously been subject to the property tax extension limitation law. Now, there's two pieces of that are very important. Well, actually, there's three pieces that are very important right now. Given that this legislation has already passed the Illinois Senate, it is possible that this law could go into effect prior to any opportunity to adjust a future levy after 2015, tax year 2015, to account for the effects, even in the short term, of the property tax extension limitation law. So, to a great extent, other than the issue of the limitation on debt, non-referendum debt, this plausibly and without being a Chicken Little could be the only levy that we have a chance to adjust to this particular law. It's something that we may not, and I would say it's probable, given the way that the budget process is going, we will not have a chance to go back and do this again after the 2015 levy. The second part, which is somewhat interesting, is I don't know how big it is for DeKalb, but in Elgin's case, they're owed millions of dollars by the state in revenue. I don't know how much we're owed, but I'm sure that we are owed some.
Not millions. I mean, what we're not getting remitted to us is our video gambling, which is not a lot. And the MFT is probably the largest amount that we're not getting, our motor fuel tax dollars.
Have we gotten a distribution on income taxes in the last?
Yes.
Oh,
Okay.
thank goodness.
Yep,
All right.
income tax, sales tax. Local use is still in, we have not received, but that's smaller. But our two largest, income tax and sales tax, we continue to get. And I'm told because they are not annually appropriated, we would be still receiving those.
Okay, so in Elgin's case, theirs is a major part of that is gaming taxes, which they are not remitting. Exactly is the local use tax? How do they calculate that?
Local use tax is, the way I think of it is, it's similar to sales tax, but it's for tax, someone is buying it from another location and bringing it here, or internet sales, we can get remitted local use tax through online sales as well.
Now, so the local use tax is an actual calculated amount from those other sources. I mean, it's pretty substantial for DeKalb relative to the sales tax.
It's definitely growing, it's a growing source of revenue because of internet sales. It's not anywhere near, and I wish, I'm sorry, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head for a total year.
I have
It's
the
not-
budget, I have the budget,
Yeah,
I
I
can
do
pull
too.
it,
It's
but,
not near our sales tax dollars.
but it's actually being calculated and then distributed by the state?
State, yes.
Okay, so if somebody bought a car elsewhere, we would get the local share based on them registering it here?
Correct.
Okay, all right. And the last point with respect to the notion of the property tax levy, and I think this might be the most important part for local citizens to recognize. When the property tax extension limitation first went into effect, and when there was consideration of home rule in other jurisdictions, there's always a concern that home rule or these property tax extension limitations are going to cap rogue governments, and that home rule is just a blank check for local governments to be able to tax their citizens. Well, one of the things that I think should be evident in the process of the discussions that we're having right now is that the city of DeKalb and most other home rule jurisdictions have utilized their home rule powers when it comes to revenue as a means of diversification of revenue and not as a cash grab. And what you would see if we were to set out and levy for all of our general obligation debt, levy for the full cost of pensions, levy for a full corporate levy, the property tax levy that we would be allowed to levy would be substantially higher than it is right now. So anything that we talk about with respect to an increase in the levy is something that should not be viewed as a cash grab and should be taken in the context of the fact that your local municipality has been very, very conservative with respect to the burden that is placed on local property taxpayers, local residents, local businesses. And the last point, I know I said the last one was the last point, but in the backup, Finance Director Haley provided a comparison between, I think it was 2004 and 2014, on what happened to tax, our proportion of the taxes. Remember that there's been a decrease in property values. I didn't go back to 2004, but in recent years, there's been a decrease in property values. So just because you see a higher tax rate doesn't mean that the average person is paying more or that full amount in their property taxes. That would assume that there was no decrease in the property value. So 2006 to 2015, those, you would have a substantial drop in all cases, I think, probably still in the 15 to 20% drop in property value. So if you had a $150,000 home in 2006, the odds are that your assessed value is going to be lower now. So what Finance Director Haley has provided is a worst-case scenario. If you had no decrease and it was all put on your property taxes, this is what it would look like. So, sorry, I just thought those clarifications were necessary. The 2015 tax levy.
Okay, so I don't have a presentation because I wanted to kind of, I think we've gone through the levy itself. The memo that I sent out set it up in a series of steps to kind of go through one by one what we're trying to bite off here with this year's tax levy, considering there are some new factors between the Senate Bill 318 and the Moody's rating and the GASB actuarial valuation changes. So I don't know if we want to go through these one by one and then get to the last three options. There are a total of 6 different options. There can be, a variety of different options based on these factors that we're going to discuss, but that was my first initial thought, and I can answer any questions as we go through it. But I initially wanted to set it up to note, as a reminder that the pension obligations for fully funding police, fire, IMRF, and Social Security through the property tax levy, that has been a priority for the City Council. It is in their financial policy, which I did attach as attachment A. We do levy fully based on an actuarial calculation for police and fire and have been. And then for IMRF and Social Security, that has fluctuated over the years. We do not levy anything for our city debt. The only debt we don't abate is that for the library bonds. And then any other dollars that we could levy for, currently we are not. So general fund support, police, fire protection, any audit expenditures could also be levied for. And in the policies, it also goes on to say levy for any additional personnel as determined by City Council. So there is a hierarchy that goes along with the city's financial policies. I can go on to state that the City Council has funded the 2 police and fire pension funds currently at the lowest state level since 2011, which is the PUC level. Now with Moody's changing their calculations and GASB changing their calculations, showing the net pension liability based on the higher funding method, those organizations are kind of in contradiction with the state of Illinois, who's still allowing us to, levy at the lower level.
Well, they're not in contradiction with the state's recommendation. They're in contradiction with what the state will allow us to do.
Yes,
Because the
exactly.
state does recommend the higher level, and this was also an issue in Elgin.
Yep. Just as today I received from the Department of Insurance, we do get an actuarial evaluation from the state as well, from the Department of Insurance, which came in for as long as I can look back, which was to 1994. The state's actuarial evaluation has always come in higher than our third-party city actuarial evaluation, and that is again true this year. For the police pension fund, it came in almost $400,000 higher than the third-party actuarial evaluation that we did receive.
What do you mean by the actuarial evaluation?
To fund the police, this is just for police.
This
to
is
fund the
what
pension
is
fund.
necessary to fund it.
Correct,
So basically, the required contribution, in
correct,
quotes, came in higher with the state method than with your actuary.
correct.
Okay. All right, I just
Right.
wanted to make that clear because higher, lower can get confusing.
Yeah, right, true. So I went through the history of the tax levy. We are not funding fully the employer portion for IMRF or Social Security at this time. And That was for fiscal 15. We funded through the property tax levy 30.73% of actual costs for IMRF and 40.02% for Social Security, which dropped from 97% from fiscal 14. So that doesn't mean we're not paying those obligations. We're certainly, the city is paying those obligations, but the general fund is picking up based on other revenue sources that the property tax levy is not funding. So the police and fire pension fund, it's a one-for-one. The revenue that we have been levying year after year is a corresponding to the penny expenditure. So it's not necessarily a revenue source for anything but police and fire pension, which is nice. It's transparent. We know where the money's going. So that was kind of the first factor. If we wanted to discuss how important it is to fund the employer pension obligations fully through the property tax levy.
I think that we need to take that piece out and discuss it separately, because,
Okay.
and I want to make it clear what my agenda is with respect to that. We may come back and say that we want to keep the levy at a certain level, but for a year, we might want to change what accounts the levy goes into. But as a matter of principle, I think that we need to agree upon the level at which we intend to fund the pensions through property taxes for tax year 2015. I would be remiss, given the feedback that I have received from citizens, if I didn't begin the discussion by saying, with respect to police and fire, okay, this is the employer portion of the pensions. Unlike some other local governments, the city of DeKalb and most cities are not 100% funding both sides of the pension. Police and fire make contributions, I think one of them is close to 10%, if not over 10%, and the other, go ahead.
You
What are
can
the
correct me if I'm wrong. One's 9.91% and the other is 9.45%?
Right. So those are substantial. And those are employees who do not get Social Security as part of their job here. Okay? So if this were a private employer, there would still be a match in the range of, what is it now, 7%?
7.65.
7.65 is the employer's portion?
Yes, Social
So-
Security, Medicare, both.
Right, okay, Social Security and Medicare, both, 7.65%, okay? So, funding police and fire and providing the employer's match is really not that different from the match that every Social Security employee gets. With respect to IMRF, those people receive a reduced contribution to make up for the fact that most of them are eligible for Social Security, as I understand it. Is that an accurate statement? That our contribution for IMRF is in the 4% range?
4.5.
4.5.
Employee is 4.5%. The
And-
employer's rate varies every year based on actuarial
Okay,
valuation.
but those employees are also paying the 7.65%
Correct.
for Social Security. So everybody's paying somewhere around 10 to 12% toward their own pension. Okay, so this is not a free grab of taxpayer dollars, and it also is something I have heard many citizens complain that they shouldn't have to pay anything toward public employee pensions because if public employees don't contribute anything toward their own pensions. So that feeling is out there, and I brought it forward. So let's see what the committee thinks as to what your preference is as to the level at which the pension should be funded through the property tax. Tom?
Just a couple thoughts. Also, historically, I think the council has intentionally and knowingly ensured that they made all the pension payments on behalf of the city for as long as I've been associated with it, well over 8 to 10 years, according to the requirements, and have made those payments through the use of property taxes, and I'm talking particularly the police and fire pension obligations. So they've intentionally been making those payments, and I think the council was very dutiful in doing that and not underfunding the pension based on the actuarial calculations as provided by the city's actuary. So I think that was knowing and intentionally done. Now, looking at the current sets of calculations due to methodology changes, there's really two changes that I see happening. And one of the things I was trying to get at last time was how sensitive was this calculation to the somewhat underperformance of the investment portion of the earnings, and how much of the calculation was impacted by the change of the mortality rates and other underlying assumptions that were part of the calculation. And in looking at the backup data, I think it's pretty clear that the majority of that dollar amount and the impact, which is increasing even at our current lower level of funding, almost $700,000 increase in liability that's being recommended that be paid, is largely due to the mortality rate change in the current method, and that the second method, the change that is being discussed as an alternate, which is more costly in the short term, which would better fund the pensions in the long term, is about an increment of some $300,000. So in my mind, I'm looking at an increase of total costs in that $675,000 to $700,000 under our current method, and the $975,000 or thereabouts in the new method that staff is in support of. So there's about $300,000 differential. As to what can be funded with increased property tax, first of all, I think we should continue to fund it out of the current property tax, and I think there would be adequate monies to basically do that. The amount of increase that wants to be tackled and how we pay for that, I think, is the primary discussion before we get into the PTEL and all the other strategic issues that may affect how the bill is looked at. But that underlying funding mechanism in dealing with that $675,000 or $700,000 versus that $975,000 to me is critical. I'm going to support a very modest increase in the overall levy. In looking back at the city's presentation on October 7th and 10th, they were talking about other revenue streams that have been improved and cost containment that was made and underway, hiring freezes and things along that nature, I think, would not be difficult to cover a $700,000, $750,000 change. That would be our current method. To get to $975,000, you would have to seek other constraints to enable us to accomplish that. That would be the city's past practice regarding property tax has been to increase the property tax basically only for new growth, if they even did that. I don't even think they did that last year. I would also maybe support a CPI-type level increase like we did with water as an operating cost support, understanding that the costs are going up. But those would be my thoughts regarding it, is that there are alternative ways to handle this, and I know some of the revenue streams are increasing, and some cost containment would be able to enable us to get to that $750,000. If you wanted to go to the full $975,000 under the new method, you'd have to seek probably some additional alternate ideas for that.
Other members? Please speak up. We want
Well,
everyone's view to be represented.
maybe this is not a very smart question, but
Speak more
some of the options that we were given last couple weeks ago did increase the fire and police pension. And 4, 5, and 6, they're the same. Is that doable?
So the intention of adding 4, 5, and 6 was to kind of incorporate Senate Bill 318. So if you look at Senate Bill 318, it says that the aggregate levy will be the 2015 aggregate levy will be our base levy.
Right.
And that aggregate levy for the city is strictly our IMRF dollars currently and our Social Security dollars. So we levy nothing else in the aggregate portion of our levy, which means that amount would stay low at the $400-some thousand. So the thought was to increase the corporate portion of that bucket to increase the aggregate portion, and this is all up for discussion, to increase that aggregate levy with knowing that the corporate portion of the levy is one of the only portions that's not necessarily tied one-for-one to an expenditure. So it would we'd still be, of course, still pay fully our police and fire pension obligations. At what level would be determined. But I would like to just state that while we are looking at a pretty good year, everything is still somewhat fluctuating for revenue sources except property taxes. Property tax is one of the revenue sources that is constant, and we know our pension costs are constant. To have it a one-for-one is, it's that guaranteed revenue source. And if you look at some of the trend charts that we have had added into this memo, you can just see that the pension costs are not going to go up. They're going to continue to go up. They're unless there's a huge legislation change, but they're going to go up every year. So,
Let's be really careful, Kathy.
okay,
Our pension costs are not constant, they're predictable.
exactly.
Once we get our actuarial report, we know what that number is.
Yep.
Okay, for a given year. That doesn't mean that it's constant, it means that it's predictable.
Yep. Yep.
So in the aggregate levy, we can pay pension out of corporate? Pension costs out of corporate?
Correct.
Okay, and then, but you wanted to bump that up because this would be the last time
Right.
possibly
Right,
that we
to set our,
could do that?
right.
Okay.
Right, and that, to some extent, is a separate issue. That's a question of how to pay the pension costs.
Right, right.
And so, what I'd like to try to stay focused on is how much of the pension costs, regardless of what account, in the property tax, how much of the pension costs do we want to cover through the property tax levy? Do we want to fully cover police and fire pension? Do we want to fully cover police and fire and IMRF? Do we want to fully cover police, fire, IMRF, and Social Security?
If I could just make one clarification, Michael. If I understood the presentation, I'm looking at the last meeting's backup material. Again, I'm looking at the difference in methodology, the PUC method versus the entry age method, right? And that's the 675,000 or 972,000. Those are real increases in operating expenses that we are having to deal with one way, shape, or another. And just looking at that presentation, that was to do the current method of PUC, which is the lower level, is 15.8% increase in property tax, and the entry age was 22.7% increase. So when we talk about these, they're substantial numbers relative to the current property tax in and of itself. My earlier comments were, I think there's other means to pay for those amounts other than property tax. The only other thing I would mention at this point was, back at the time we did the budget, we as a committee made a series of recommendations during the budget process. that we discussed pretty thoroughly. And one of those was that we would not support another tax or revenue increase for operations without tax rate data. And I think the intent there was to do a comprehensive comparative study of all the tax rates to see where we're high or low, because some of our rates are very high, and then how we should, in the long term, 3, 4, 5 years, get to a more balanced approach to this whole issue with that kind of an analysis. I would still suggest that that's the way I feel about not supporting a major increase in the property tax for operations without doing that comprehensive analysis, which is what I would hope we'd do in front of our budget cycle this coming budget cycle.
Just, we are going to do a comprehensive fee analysis. I just want to reiterate, the three largest sources of revenue that we have are income tax, which is based on our population, sales tax, which we have done an analysis on our sales tax rate for home rule, and, well, the 1% is the 1%, everybody gets that. So those are our three largest sources, I think, and property taxes. And if you look at the percentage, one, we rely heavily on sales tax, not as heavily on property tax, and that we have had a couple independent third-party sources tell us that we do need to, what's the word I'm looking for?
Broaden.
There you go. Broaden that tax base a little bit so that we can increase, an increase to property taxes may be needed.
Lynn, Ron?
I have a couple of questions. I don't want to run screaming because I'm new to this, and I read through all your fine materials you sent me, Carrie, and so I've got a couple of questions. I'll try and keep them, because it'll take me a few meetings to get up to speed. As I understood it, that there was the CUP and there's the entry, I've forgotten the terminology.
Entry aid.
One is paid less now, and it becomes more later. Entry level is, to put it in simplified terms, pay as you go, correct?
It's more steady. It's more of a,
Correct.
should be more of a steady of a payment, but.
Yeah, and I read the Moody's thing, and from reading the report I got, it sounded very good. They did make the comment, they thought we were a little heavy on sales tax and not as reliant on property tax, if I'm getting this correct, where we're going with this. And what we're discussing is, you said fully paying for.
Well,
I'm gonna
the
get this
degree
wrong.
to which we wish
Fund.
to pay for pensions.
At the current rate of like 9.91.
No, whatever's due, do we want to fully fund
Make up.
the amount through property
Okay,
taxes,
okay.
or do we want to use a mix of revenue sources, and
Okay.
how much of that?
Okay.
Also, knowing the city has diligently been working towards, in our our financial policies, to get to a 25% fund balance reserve, which we were very, very low in 2010. I think it was 1%.
I saw that.
And have been working very hard to grow that back up, and we want to try to sustain it. So it's not that there's, a reserve of revenue. The source has to come from somewhere.
And to be clear, if the revenues stay the way that they're budgeted, if you're not going to fund the pensions through the property tax, that means we're cutting in expenditure to be able to make up that difference. So to be clear and succinct, if it's not funded through the property taxes, we're cutting services or we're cutting expenditures in order to make up that difference. And as Director Haley pointed out, it's not like you're seeing the police and fire pension funds flatline. The trends over the last 19 years is to see an increase. So you can speculate based on that data what you expect to see in the future.
I would reiterate some things Tom.
All right. As much as I've talked over the last couple of meetings, I have not really weighed in on what my opinion is here, and I will do so now. First of all, I take issue with my colleague, Mr. Tarazinski, that the council in the past has been responsible with respect to its choices of funding pensions. Just like almost any municipality or other local government, we have chosen to fund at the lowest possible legal level. So I think that I definitely support moving to the funding methodology that is supported by GFOA and Moody's, I think. Yeah, the early entry age, okay? I definitely think that we should fund at that particular level. That's the way that I think we should calculate the necessary contribution for police and fire, because those are the two that we have control over. Okay. Now, the issue of the property tax. I think this is a very, very difficult issue. When we discussed the property tax levy last year, it was pointed out that it may not be appropriate to fund 100% of any of the pensions on the property tax. And there's a few reasons for that. Tom, help me here because you were the one that brought some of this up. One is that if you fund 100% of the fire and police, or 100% of the pensions through the property tax, then none of the TIF property contributes to the pensions, because that money is all segregated and that money does not go toward the pensions. In addition, there are personnel at the city whose pensions are paid from sources other than the property tax. For example, I believe that we fully load the pensions for the water fund into the water fund.
Correct, but
Okay.
the comparisons that I am using in my data is strictly general fund IMRF costs and general fund social security costs.
Okay, so it's not the total cost of pensions for the city.
No.
It's only those that are being supported by the property tax or other general fund revenues.
Right,
And there are no transfers from the water fund to the
Okay.
general fund to cover any of those costs.
not those costs. The only transfer we're currently doing from the water fund is the property tax in lieu of payment in
Okay,
lieu of property taxes.
I understand.
The pilot.
I understand. Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Just
Yeah,
one point
please.
on that, and there'll be others, but this one on the water thing. We elected last year to change our accounting methodology to include passbacks of administrative costs and so forth from the general fund into the water fund. Personnel-related costs.
Personnel costs are now directly being hit to
Charged.
regular salary line items, IMRF line items, through payroll based on a
And
percentage.
that's a total absorption cost,
I'm not sure what you mean.
benefits, medical costs, total absorption.
Correct. For those specific, so if it's the utility billing clerk, it's strictly for those employees that are doing water-related
Right,
work.
Well, that was about 700 and some thousand dollars worth of total cost transfers. I'm just pointing out that some of that would be pension, other benefits.
The total cost was about 500 and some thousand, the other two was the pilot.
Right, but I do appreciate the fact, yes, that's true. But what Finance Director Haley is saying is we're not going to save anything in terms of the backup material, because those pension costs were not included in what was being paid for IMRF in
Just those from the general fund side, right.
Yeah,
Right.
Just
just-
part of that 500.
So we have additional pension costs, as
Right,
you're
right.
quite correctly pointing out, that are being charged to,
Right.
to other funds and being covered by things other than the property tax.
Right, and the fire department does that and so forth. They elect to go out and, NIU covers their portion of their service bill, and it's intended to be a fully absorbed cost. And I think some of the other service fees are intended to be fully absorbed type costs. So some of those pension dollars, in effect, are being absorbed back through service fees to that extent that they exist.
I think the fees that are being charged for fire protection services, and no fire protection services are being provided for through the use of property tax revenue. So.
No, that's correct, but what Mr. Tarazinski is saying is that when we, for example, when we provide contracted services to the university or other places, whether it's on overtime or whether it's due to contract, those are fully loaded costs. They include personnel, they're supposed to. For example, if we, and this has been something that we've talked about quite a bit, if we charge for a police officer, okay, we don't just charge what we have to pay out in a wage. We charge so that we don't come out behind. We load that.
On benefits.
I don't think so.
The benefits are loaded in.
I don't think so either.
Yes.
It's strictly wages, and if it's overtime, then it's their overtime dollar amount.
So
Well,
the
then we
benefits
need
are
to change
being
that,
covered. Yeah.
because it should be fully
It
loaded.
should be.
It should be fully loaded.
Should be.
Because our cost, unless there's a public service, or, I'm sorry, unless there's a public reason that you want to do that, which I can imagine in certain circumstances, but the bottom line is, if you're going to charge somebody for a service, you got to fully load it. We're not recovering the cost of us putting that officer out
right.
there if we don't charge for the benefits. Yeah.
Pension, all that stuff.
So,
Well, and I think it becomes what's what. There's nothing being charged for fire or police protection through property taxes either, yet that service is being provided to every resident. So, you could say, okay, let's put some fire protection dollars in property taxes and less of the pension, but it's.
we're not at that,
Different.
we're not, that's a different issue. We're not at that particular point. What we're talking about here, okay, is we're talking about, let's keep this pure, we're talking about a personnel cost, okay? And when, for example, the university, as you well know, I mean, if we charge somebody for service, for example, on a grant, we load that so that you're paying the benefits too, because
to.
you have to do that. And it's not comparable to police or fire protection, and this doesn't have anything to do with the property tax, okay?
And that
This
can
is
be
a
30 to 40% of the
Or more,
wage paid.
or
Yeah,
more,
easy.
or more.
This is a different issue.
Yeah, it's a
Right.
different issue from what we're doing
No,
tonight.
but, okay, the point that, let's bringing this back to where the discussion started, okay? There are some pension costs out there that are expected to be paid by other sources. For example, the TIF, that property is not contributing to the pensions because of the way, the structure of TIF. All that I was saying here was that there may be some portion of costs related to contracts. Apparently, that's not the case, and so, I accept that. The bottom line is this. I am comfortable with saying we need to cover the higher pension cost, and we need to cover it through some combination of revenues. I am comfortable with the fact that it won't be 100% on the property tax, because I think it probably doesn't need to be 100% on the property tax, given where some of those personnel costs are coming from. For example, to the extent that we are providing police services to people from out of town, not related to a business in the community, it seems appropriate that a portion of general fund revenues from, say, the sales tax would be a contributor to the pensions. My most important point is I want us to be budgeting for the pension costs at the higher level to get that funding ratio up. That's my bottom line, and I don't support putting 100% of that on the property tax, but now we need to negotiate what that number will be.
I just want to clarify, I don't know how the fire IGA is written with NIU, so it could very well incorporate all of those costs. Police, I know we do charge back overtime salaries when they are called out to assist.
Right.
So-
No, I understand. We're still at the level of principle.
Right.
I think.
Okay.
And my principle is go with the early entry age. Okay. Figure out what we need to fund with that early entry age. And now we have to figure out how that transfers through to the levy that we would recommend to the city council. And that's going to be a difficult vote, but that's my perspective.
So I guess the clarifying issue then is the 972,000 versus the 675,000. I was in support of keeping it until we got our 25% level. And one rational reason for doing that at the lower level, under our current method, is we have this huge hit due to the mortality rate change happening, which is driving most of that 675,000. And then we have an incremental 300,000 to jump to this new, entry age method. So it's an increment of 300,000. I know that will be difficult to deal with if we don't deal with it partially in the property tax. But I remain convinced, even if we adopt the early entry method, that we should do the majority of that, the vast majority of that, on other than property tax. Property tax and the competitiveness of our city are important. We brought that up a little bit last time, and I remain concerned about the relative position we have in the county with our rates and our overall structure. I do believe in past discussions there was a lot of emphasis on raising sales taxes and local restaurant and bar taxes and other things that were so general that they would try to gain revenue in the long term from the students, because we were not getting any property tax base out of NIU. So strategic discussions about how best to tax the total populace were had, and that was part of why those rates were increased back 5, 6, 7 years ago, because it was thought that they would be more general in approach and includes the students to try and help get some of those revenues to pay for our operating costs here at the city. I'm not against going to the 972. I understand the concern there, taking it all in one bite, but I would still suggest staying with the other one until next year and deal with this at the budget to make sure we can cover this obligation. When do we actually make this deposit? Do we make this upon the second or first collection, or do they go right in? When do we make the pension payment, actually? In June or September?
I'm sorry, I have to think about the timing. I'm in year 15, 16, 17 right now. Right, July.
Okay, so it'd be
In between.
but after the collection, so it'd be in next budget year?
Correct.
Not the current budget year, that's already determined. This would be in the next budget year.
Correct.
So we're making a determination to collect property taxes to pay our pension liability in fiscal year 17.
Correct.
Correct.
All right, that's useful. That's very useful.
That gives us a budget cycle to also work toward the solution set. And I would urge council to consider that as well in their thought process about trying to gulp down the whole thing in one fell swoop.
Keeping in mind, we are also looking for a revenue source for our streets, fleet, and equipment as well.
Yeah, this is a very, very difficult issue. And one of the things, you know, at one time, last year, I actually did this, but I think it's important to point this out, that, and I always preface this by saying, I'm not suggesting this, I'm using it as an example, and that is if tomorrow we were to eliminate the police department and eliminate the fire department, we would still have the lion's share of these pension costs. Over 70% of the pension costs that we're paying right now, based on last year, over 70% is making up the deficits
Right.
from the past. And you still have to pay your pension obligations based on the things that have already been earned. So this is not a function of something that is related to the way that we are currently staffing moving forward with respect to the police and the fire department. We've got to come to a decision now. And let me again set up two issues here. Number one, we need to decide how much we want to levy for the purpose of pensions. Okay. Now, we're going to revisit that potentially with, what is it, options 4, 5, and 6. We may move some of that off of the pension levy and onto, say, the corporate, which could still be used for pensions. But this is just a pure question of, in isolation, what do we want the levy for pensions to be? And our choices are,
4, 5, and 6, correct? Options 4, 5, and 6, no.
no, they aren't. They're the options that we would be looking at this point are options,
From the last week, 1, 2,
Yeah.
and 3?
yes,
Okay,
because 4, 5, and 6 take into account the PTEL.
Right.
okay.
Okay.
So
And
it's
we're-
1,
we're-
2, or 3
So it's
then
one,
from last week.
1, 2, or 3.
Okay.
Which, what were the three amounts?
Here's the first one, the second one, and then the third one. There you go.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
right, it was, number one was, oh. Do you have an extra copy of last?
So the
I brought my.
levy. No. This would be after abatements, okay? And we're not go ahead.
Can I make a suggestion, if you don't have the previous memo, if you look at page 13 of the memo for this evening?
Very back,
The
yeah.
options are listed, the dollar amounts, and the explanation as to how they're structured.
Page 13, Ann?
Page 13 of,
Thank you.
It's kind of a summary version.
Oh, okay.
That's the details.
All right. So, the option 1 would be a total levy of $6,630,365, which would be the increase of $1.8 million, 1.8, yeah. Option 2 is the
Your next page.
yeah, no,
The
correct,
969?
with,
969, 306.
right. But that is, the first one was with less debt abated. Correct?
Correct.
Option one, you'd
Yes.
have less debt abated, so a portion of that 1.9 million would be for debt.
Correct.
Okay? The second one
Right.
is only doing the, going back to the early entry age, but not, changing the abatement of the debt.
Correct.
That would be a 969,306.
Right.
Okay? And option three would be keeping,
672.
keeping the PUC. And just increasing our contribution under the PUC for what would be required, and that would also maintain the tax abatement. Okay?
And Mr. Chair, can I suggest that you want to look at option 5, just as the dollar amount, not the method, but looking at, it's a hybrid of
Yes, I like
of
that
an
one.
in-between. So just to throw that in as far as if you're looking at strictly the dollar amount.
So option five
21.
is where does the rest of the money come from, Ann?
That's phasing in back up to the entry age method, so it's kind of funding the two pension funds between the PUC and the entry age method, kind of in two phases, so that we're going to work our way back up to that method in a year or two, which is legal, because we're
Oh, I
still
see.
funding at the
Yeah,
lowest
okay.
level.
So, option four is the one where we would we would fully fund it at the 969, but we'd put a portion of it on the corporate levy.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. All right. So, let's take a straw poll. Is there support for option one? Okay, option one is off the table. Is there support for option three? Okay, all right. So we're down to 2, 4, 5, and 6. I would say that because we rejected option 3, can I assume that we will reject option 6?
Yep.
Okay. So, in effect, for the total levy, we're down to the 969,306 or the 821,083. And then, you can choose between option 2 and option 5 in that particular regard. I'm going to go to staff on this point, since we're down to these two options, and then we'll have additional committee discussion.
May I ask a question? Won't option 5 assist us in our strategy that we've got to try to work to make the base larger that we build on if this freeze goes in that's already passed which chamber?
The
It's
Senate.
already passed the Senate. So option 5 would help us more with that part of the strategy. Is that true?
Option 4 or 5, actually.
Okay.
Yep,
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
That puts that increase up into our aggregate levy base. And I did
Thank you.
confirm again that the debt service levy base, we have another
Will be
year on
determined
that.
Another year. And we will have to deal with that. Okay. So we don't need to worry about the abatement this year, the abatement of bond service. Do I have a motion just to get it on the table for option 4? We can take things in one fell swoop. We can still vote against it. I'm just getting an option on the floor. Yes, Tom?
I guess the option that I had discussed earlier isn't in this group, which basically was to keep the levy operating near its current projections and the current process that had been used, which would keep it relatively flat. That would be The levy would be increased by the growth in the community, the real growth in new building, new real estate, plus a CPI, which if we said that was 1%, that would be a $40,000 increase. New growth is probably not more than 30 to 40,000.
And we will not know new growth. We won't know it.
Understand. I'm just pointing out it's not a huge number.
It's not a huge
Right.
number at this
So
point.
we'd be talking about that option, raising about 80,000 and applying the increased income tax, which, based on the staff's memo of October 7th, would generate about 400,000 annually and make up the difference necessary to cover your 969,000 increase to cover your suggested method, Michael, with other reductions. Given that we don't need to make the payment until next budget year, we would deal with obtaining those reductions necessary to hit that number, I think, through that process, including the current freeze that you've had on hiring, which is generating some savings. So that would be the option I was talking about earlier.
I can't in any way, shape, or form support that because I think that it's time to stop kicking the can down the road. We have got to fully fund the pensions. And we have to levy at minimum for the backup that we have. And I think that anything else that we do below the, even the 600,000 the 672 that we rejected, is really giving people a misimpression as to what the costs of government are. Basically, what we're saying is, we're in a run of business where our costs continually go up, and we're not going to increase our prices, and we're going to just keep putting ourselves under pressure. There are people who believe that this is an expenditure problem. For the most part, I would strongly disagree with this. It has been shown time after time after time across the state of Illinois, and we have a governor who will not believe this. We have a revenue problem. We have a revenue problem. And it is very hard to say that to people. I am here as a representative of the taxpayer as well. I am a taxpayer, okay? But I cannot ignore the fact that regardless of whether we incurred any costs for police and fire services, those being the big ticket items, that we have a $700,000 bill coming due. Actually, it's closer to $1 million bill. And to just try to hope that we're going to be able to figure out a solution to that $1 million hole is not something I would agree with. I respect completely the opposing position to that, but I personally would vote against that.
And just to be clear, and again, for those watching, I was not at all suggesting we not cover and pay for the level of pension obligation and liabilities that are due. And if this committee recommends the entry age normal method, which is the higher level, I understand that and can support that, moving to that method, even though in this case it'll cost us $300,000 incremental over the current method. But the biggest bite is already having to deal with the pension liability. We need to pay for that. We need to recognize that. But total operating costs and what this community is able to bear total tax-wise, I think has to be evaluated, and we need to be assured that we have a plan going forward, because these numbers aren't going up, and a $970,000 increase is a 22.7% increase in property taxes. That's not an easy number to swallow, and I appreciate that, you understand that, but that's a big number to swallow, and from a competitive position in alluring new business, existing businesses, and so forth, we need to come up with a method to handle this, and raising taxes is, in my opinion, not the only way that we need to get at this.
I want to add just a little bit, follow up on what you're saying, Mr. Tarasinski. I think it's important to all of us in this room that DeKalb as a city hold its attractiveness for both new rooftops for residents or for businesses. And for that reason, I have strong reservations about raising the property tax level very much at all. I would like to keep it, any increase in the levy, to keep it as modest as possible, especially keeping in mind people like the job that Ellen DeVita has over here. Just a little earlier this year, I received a publication from the National Tax Foundation in collaboration with the Taxpayers Federation of Illinois that illustrates rather clearly that the number one tax burden for any business in the state of Illinois is property tax. That's this blue line over here on the far side. So that trying to minimize an increase in the levy, I think, is very important in holding on to our attractiveness to businesses and also to people who would be making a decision about where to live for their residents also. And I do understand and support very much that we need to fund these pension obligations and get caught up. That is absolutely necessary. At the same time, I don't want to make the life of people such as Ellen any more challenging to attract new businesses or to make us any less attractive to new residents. So it may be necessary to put part of the burden there, but I would like to try to minimize the impact.
Couple things. Number one, that is some of the most misleading information that one will ever see. What it is a function of is the fact that businesses in the state of Illinois, corporations, do not pay income taxes. Okay? You can go down to Springfield and you can find out that less than 25% of Illinois corporations pay a dime in income taxes. So
But
the
many
fact-
businesses are partnerships and sole proprietorships.
Hear me out. Okay. Second of all, it's well-known in the literature that property taxes do not influence the location of businesses. Okay, it's actually pretty well-known in the literature, and in fact, there is some evidence that you are far worse off if you diminish your local services than if you charge property taxes. But that aside, there is a perception, and the perception is exactly what you have said, that if you raise property taxes, there's at least a perception. Okay. But let's put this all into perspective, okay? This isn't a 22% increase in property taxes. It's a 22% increase in 7% of the property tax bill. It is a 1% increase in property taxes. The city of DeKalb, because it is arguably the most transparent of the local governments in the area, just because of meetings like this, okay? We are responsible for between 7 and 8% of the property tax bill, okay? You have a school district, okay? And I'm sorry to call it out, but I've called it out before. They received $21 million from the state for facilities that we were paying for and are paying for through bonds. And they put this into their operating cash reserves rather than abating property taxes. Can you imagine the outcry if we had $10 million that we could abate property taxes with and the city chose not to do it? There should be tremendous outcry against the school district, who is by far the largest portion of our property tax bills. I am getting sick and tired of the city of DeKalb 8% of your property tax bill bearing responsibility for the higher than normal property taxes here. At some point, there is a fiduciary responsibility that extends to the ongoing sustainability of the local government. And we're at that particular point. We're talking about the ongoing sustainability of the local government. And most economic developers, and Ellen can either disagree or agree with this, will tell you that on the margin, Illinois is not as bad competitively with respect to taxes as some people will have you believe. We do have problems. We've got problems with workman's comp, we've got problems with unemployment, and we've got problems with tort liability. Those are big problems, and those are things that the governor wants to try to deal with. But when you cross the borders, most of the time, it's not for tax reasons unless it's for an abatement. And so, yes, I'm very concerned. I don't want my property tax bill to go up. My property tax bill from last year to this year went down. And though the rates have continued to increase, and in this case, we're talking about an actual levy increase. We're actually talking about collecting more dollars as opposed to just simply a higher rate. We need to be transparent about that. And, you know, frankly, for me, this is, and hear the whole comment, this is a battle. The war is fully funding the pensions. And if we choose not to do it through the property tax, but we do it through a reliable other way, I consider that to be a win-win situation, and I'm not going to fight that. But from a philosophical standpoint, I don't have as much problem with increasing the property tax as some do, though I respect and appreciate all of the differences of opinion and the fact that there's a lot of people who would agree, support, and tell me that I'm crazy as opposed to the position that I've taken. So,
Mr. Chair, if I could just build on what you said, and this information is in your packet. It's the memo that Director Haley prepared that said tax levy analysis. If you look at the last 5 years for the city of DeKalb levy history without the library debt, so I'm excluding the library debt, the last 5 years from 2010, 0.27% increase. For 2011, 0%. 2012, 1.14%. 2013, 0.61%. 2014, 0%. So when you're looking at this year, and whatever percent, you have to also look at it over the time frame as to over the past 5 years. So that's 2.02% of 7% of the property tax bill for the residents. When you compare the school district over that same time period from 2012 on, 3.19%, 3.09%, 3.58%, 1.86%, 1.68%. So cumulatively, that's 13.4%. So keep in mind, 2.02% of 7% of the whole tax bill, 13.4% of 63% of the property tax bill. That is what's driving, that, and at the time I've been here, that's what's driving the discussion, is the percentage of the increase, that 63% of the property tax bill. So the city, this is a history, has been very diligent in trying to be as conservative as possible. The reality is, long-term, you're going to continue to see, I mean, if I'm going based on past history, the pensions are continue to be an issue. So whatever decision is made this year, you have to look also long-term as to, is whatever decision you make, is that sustainable? Or are you doing this just for a one-year period, or is that going to be the decision you're going to make year in and year out over the next number of years?
And just for Ron, because he's new, the city does we do have debt, but we abate all of it, which is over $4.5 million that we do not pass along through our property taxes. So we abate that, and that's paid through other revenue sources, either from sales tax or some of it has dedicated revenue source as well, so.
Okay, thank you.
That's $4.5 million a year in debt service, correct?
Correct.
Does that include the TIF debt?
Yes.
include what?
Yeah, the TIF debt,
Oh.
which is funded by TIF.
And how much of that is the TIF debt?
If I'm looking at this 1.423 million,
Okay, so we still have 3.1 million outside the TIF.
The whole is 5.1, I think, isn't it?
well, the 5.1 includes the library.
Right.
So
That's
I
the
didn't
library.
include that, so I
That's
kind
the-
of took that out.
Separate.
Yeah.
I always think words matter, so I've heard some, and it's been an interesting discussion, and you can read, and it's true, if property taxes go up 22%, that's the perception. I'm not typical. When I hear that, I divide it, as you mentioned, down to 7.5 or whatever. I think the average person wants to know, what is it going to cost them
Yeah.
on their property? I think also, when we talk about businesses and people, businesses tend to look at schools, they look at the stability of a community, and one of the things I've always liked about DeKalb is it's been a very stable and I think secure, for the most part, community. We live in a bad state, we know that fiscally, all we have to work, that's why I asked about that CUP, because it struck me, if we look at Chicago pensions, you look at the state system, they got into this trouble because they kept pushing it down the road. And I'd rather pay a little, have some pain up front and be stable with all this than have, this be a bigger issue in 10 years, because you get into a vicious cycle. Sometimes you almost can't get out of it. And you were asking for, motions for options. I don't know if we're still there, if we're still want to keep discussing, or.
Well, I want to hear from.
Oh, one other
Director
comment. I
Davida.
just read an article, and I should have I'll start bringing things. And I don't know if it was a business we were, Illinois does get a bad rap on taxes. They said, we're not nearly as bad as the perception has been. And again, it's words matter. They said Wisconsin, Indiana,
Wisconsin's worse.
some of these states are actually in worse shape, but through other techniques, taxing techniques, they come across better.
I have just a question, a point of clarification. The increase valuation, the increase of 22% was referenced, and I've been looking at all of the 6 options in the dollar amount, the bottom of the pages, and I don't see any of them at 22% unless I've done my math wrong. I see 6 different numbers, but not 22%. How did
So-
you arrive at that?
It's probably more like
Kathy.
20%, but the 6.47 is strictly the SSAs. So if you factor in the debt also, it's about 20.35% total levy if you included the library debt.
I'm just
But
reading
it's
it off of
strictly, yeah, it's
the
strictly.
materials from last
yeah.
meeting. right?
Yes.
That's what was
It
presented.
doesn't have the percentages.
I don't have the
That
total
sounds about
percentage.
right.
It is.
That's what it's
Sounds about right.
That should be in your packet.
Yeah.
'Cause I've been looking at the, what it means for each house at a certain value level.
Right.
In terms of the value of the city services you get for another $69 or $104 a year.
Yeah.
If it means taking money and reserving it out to pay for road improvements or buying new equipment to plow better or repair roads. That's what I was looking at, these bottom numbers here.
Well,
So-
and I think that there is, this is not good news, okay? I mean, I understand that what I'm about to say is not good news, but it does temper some of the effects. People's assessed values have dropped. I mean, people's assessed values have dropped. And so, for example, it would be very easy for someone in my position to think of my house as a $200,000 house. But when I look at my assessment, it's now a $150,000 house or whatever. So it's important that you look at your net assessed value after your exemptions and the like to see what the effect will be on your property tax bill. It's not good news that our property tax I'm sorry, it's not good news that the value of our property has decreased. But from the perspective of evaluating the options, the effect on a lot of taxpayers might be less than they think that it is because of that drop in the valuation of their property. And the fact that these don't take into account the homestead exemption, correct?
Correct.
So, if you have a $150,000 home, what's been done is you take $50,000 and multiply it by the tax rate, or the new tax rate. Well, actually, I mean, right off the top with the $6,000 exemption, you're a couple $1,000s less than that, even if the valuation of the house is correct. But if you've lost, a quarter of the value of your house, or a lot of people have lost 20%, then the effect is going to be less on your property tax bill than you might think. I'm not using that as a justification. I'm not using that as good news. I just believe that it's very important to make decisions with all the information that you have available, and to carefully figure out how this is going to affect you individually.
And just to reiterate, Ellen, option 4 and 5, I think that's what we're down to.
Well, and 2, I think, or,
2 and 5.
Okay, same dollar amounts, just where your buckets are going to be.
Yours. Yes, 2
Yeah,
and 5, and the
Tom's.
other one that Tom has outlined.
Okay, so option 5, which is phasing into the early entry age, the buckets to be determined, with the EAV staying the same, because we do not have an estimated EAV yet, and I don't want to try to predict the future. So with that, it's about $88 annually for a valuation of a home of $150,000. And if you were to go to the higher method, early entry age, all in 1 year, that is about $104 annually to a homeowner that has a valuation of $150,000 home as well. So I want to also just point out the Moody's report again, maybe for Ron, since we didn't go into detail on the Moody's report. One, that the rating is an excellent rating, and we have not dropped in our rating. But we don't want to drop in our rating, I don't think. And in the report, they said, while the city has maintained steady revenues from its property tax base, despite declines in valuation, it makes up a relatively small overall share of the operating fund revenues at 12.6%. So just, they are also looking at where our revenue buckets are at, so.
Thank you.
all right, let's try to move forward. And what I'd like to do, last year's levy for the general fund was 4.27 million, is that correct?
4.763. Well, yeah,
No, no, I'm
4.27
talking
without
for
the debt.
general
Yep,
fund.
4.27.
For the general
Yep.
fund was 4.27.
Yep,
Okay,
last year.
So that's what the issue is. Okay, so
And then the library bonds.
at this stage, I want to keep it to the pensions, okay? The library bonds are in there, keep it for the general fund. Okay, Tom, would you accept 4.5 million as being consistent with your recommendation?
Yeah, actually, I would say 4.4.
4.4?
For mine, to be specific, let's,
4.4.
4.4.
Okay, so can you make a motion to that effect?
I would make a motion that the levy recommendation from the Finance Advisory Committee be set at 4.4 million, which is to include the growth of new building, new activity in the community over the last year or two. If we didn't get it the prior year, I would support getting it for both years, plus a CPI increase of, in the neighborhood of 1%, which would be estimated, just for discussion purposes, at $4.4 million. With the remainder, I do support the $972,000 payment that is necessary to fully fund the pensions, and that payment then would necessarily be made up from other incremental revenues, such as the income tax, which is projected at a rate currently of about 400,000 increase over the budget, and the remaining 400,000 or so to be covered through budgetary cost reductions that occur in this cycle through the salary freeze that currently kind of exists, and other reductions that we come up with during the budget process next year.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion? Okay,
So what you're saying is IMRF and Social Security are going to be the same? No money going into corporate, or 200,000 going into corporate?
no,
Right,
we're
I'm just
setting the
talking about an
top,
amount.
we're setting the
Okay,
the
well,
top
I get-
limit of
okay.
the levy.
All
It's
right.
4.4.
And this is excluding the library.
Right.
Right.
Excluding the library.
Which would be an $842,953
Shortfall.
makeup from the general fund.
If we, yes, correct.
All right. All those in favor, raise your hand. Opposed?
Can I go back to in favor?
Yeah.
Okay,
it's
I'm
still-
in favor.
Okay, so it's 2 to 3, motion fails. Okay, let's,
Can we
let's,
just annotate the vote to, like we have in the past,
Yeah, I'm
Appreciate
I'm
that.
tailing you.
yeah,
so the
yeah,
council sees
Right.
the...
Yep.
right. Okay, now, let's move forward with, which would you like to vote on next? Would you, go ahead,
Can I
Tom.
make another option?
Sure,
Okay.
Instead of 4 and 5,
yes.
Tom's talking about some money available possibly for next year of about 400,000.
So can I just reiterate that 400,000 is helping us to get to our 25% reserve fund
Right.
balance? So it would decrease that goal, just,
We're-
I was thinking
Same.
about dropping the corporate, but you,
No. See, the issue is that we thought we were going to have to revisit the budget because the budget was dependent upon a certain amount of money coming in from the state. Now, it turns out that that's a little bit more than we had hoped for, but we were going to be in serious shape without that $400,000. So I don't think there's $400,000 in free money to spend. It was, how are we going to get by?
Well, let me clarify. I guess I'm reading the document of October 7th from staff regarding the projections and an update that was given to the city council regarding how the budget year was coming out. And this was done at the time of discussion about moving forward with some of the budget expenditures, and I think the council backed off on a couple of those, even though the income tax was running ahead of budget to the tune of a running rate of about 400. So it was incremental to the budget, over and above the budget. I think that was what the staff was indicating at that time, so.
right, so that we could move forward with the expenditures for fiscal 16, knowing that we were going to be, we felt sufficient to be able to move forward without still having the state pass their budget, which
Right.
they still haven't passed, which we still don't know if they will cut income tax. So while it's on the uprise because unemployment is doing better, the state can change legislation and cut that at any point in time, so.
Right, they have not set the rate yet, correct?
They haven't changed the rate.
Right, and their intention was to change the rate.
Initially, that was what was on the table, correct.
So, and they have not done anything, they haven't done anything. So, no, I mean, really, they haven't done
have
anything.
not.
So that 400,000 could disappear tomorrow.
So
Yes.
400,000 is calculated on the rate going from 3.75 back to 5?
No,
No, no.
because that
This is
doesn't
the-
It's just the
matter. It's the
current.
trend of what where we're
It's
at
just where
this
they're
We get a
year.
share based on population.
Correct.
And they're paying at a rate that hasn't changed from last year. Their intention at one point was to drastically cut it because municipalities just have tons and tons. Well, I can't remember how many billions of dollars the governor claims are in the coffers of local governments to make up for this. But
Mr. Chair, if I could just add, so at that meeting, Director Haley focused and highlighted to the council what's happening on the revenue side. In the coming meetings, we're going to be talking about some of the expenditure issues and difficulties that we're having, specifically on the vehicle side. We're seeing some, I would say, catastrophic failure of some vehicles that are hitting the end of their life cycle, where we have to make some choices of spending high amounts on transmissions. We have an end loader that's failed at the airport. We've had issues with 3 ambulances failing all within a generally relative same period of time. We've had issues with squad cars. We have an issue with one of our street sweepers. So when you look at that 400,000, I just want to especially, for our newest Finance Advisory Committee member, to understand that there's this whole piece of the pie that we're not talking about, the things that we're not doing and we're not funding, particularly vehicles. And at any point in time that you want more specific information on that, I would defer easily to the police chief and the fire chief and our interim public works director to comment on that.
The vehicle inventory that you showed us, gave to us back in the spring, made it crystal clear about the poor condition of much of the
But we're-
vehicle, the rolling stock.
Yeah, and, I mean, we're feeling the impact right now that, I mean, essentially, we're replacing 2 squad cars, which the council approved last night. We're anticipating hopefully any day now to get our new used fire engine, but that's it. Those are the only vehicle purchases, and correct me if I'm wrong, look at John, but I believe that's it, it's in the budget.
I would suggest that we try to see if we can get agreement on option 5, since that's the lowest of the options that we didn't reject. Can I have a motion on?
Did we reject option 2?
No, we did not, but if we can't get agreement on option 5, then we're not going to get it on option 2, because option 5 is a lower increase. And I think right now, there is concern about the overall increase
Right.
in the levy. So let's, I mean, we could shoot for an intermediate amount. Let's see how we do on option 5. Can I have a motion on option 5?
I'll make a motion on 5.
Second.
Okay. Connie?
No, I was just going to say.
All right.
Nope.
Okay. All those in favor of option 5, raise your hand.
I can live with option 5.
Opposed? Okay. All right, just for the sake of completeness, which do you want to vote on, option 2 or 4?
2 or 4?
I would go 2.
What?
They're both different.
Well, all right, let's do them both then. I need a motion on option 2,
I'll make a
Someone-
motion on option 2.
okay?
No, not going to second.
Well, you can vote against it.
Okay, I'll
It's just,
second.
Or
okay.
you can let it die for
Right,
lack of a
right,
second.
Yeah,
right,
that's
you
true,
can.
actually.
Well, I think we owe them a vote. Okay, all those in favor of option 2, raise your hand. Okay, all those opposed? Okay, now let's do the same thing for option 4. Okay. Can I get a motion on option 4? So moved. Okay, can I get a second? Okay.
Die.
Option
Died for lack of a
5, or option 4 died for lack of a second. Okay. So our recommendation will be option number 5. Okay. Thank you. This is an extremely difficult decision. I really hope that that what happens is that the Senate Bill, 318? If that doesn't pass, and doesn't get put into law, everybody's job becomes much, much easier, because we will not feel the pressure to artificially increase the levy, and that's what it would be doing, is trying to cover our financial
For the debt.
tail, right, for the debt, so, but I think that the committee, having given this recommendation, wants to, and please pipe in, members of the committee, wants to make it quite clear that there is an expectation that by increasing this levy, that we are going to have increased financial scrutiny and fiscal conservativeness, so that this $800,000 increase is not merely a bump of $800,000 in the operating budget of the city. We're tying this to a particular cost that came forward, but this is not a blank check for city government by any stretch of the imagination. We're asking our residents to pony up, and that is a very significant thing, and it's not something that I take lightly, even though, you know, I've made comments about why I think it is a responsible action. It is a difficult decision, but it is something where we have to earn the public's trust by showing that this was a responsible decision, and it's one that won't decrease the pressure that we place on ourselves to be transparent, to be fiscally responsible, and to be as conservative as possible with respect to our spending. Good. Okay. All right. Budget year-end change, fiscal year change.
It's like a bad penny, it just keeps coming back, so. Changing from a June 30th fiscal year end to December 31st fiscal year end. We have added John Laskowski, if he wanted to say a few words, but he wrote a complete memo, because the biggest benefit for this is for our Public Works Department. And he kind of wrote a substantiation if he wants to.
Basically, the evaluation I did looked at kind of three benefits that I perceived from changing the fiscal year. So currently we have, the fiscal year we're looking at starts in July or June, is it June?
July 1.
July 1, so end of June. When we let projects, based on the fiscal year, we let them in August. Contractors, when they're bidding their workload, typically start looking for work in January, February, March to fill up their schedules. And when you let a project in August, they already have their schedule kind of sorted out. So thinking of it from a contractor's perspective, maybe you do have the capacity to add this work, maybe you don't. But the price of doing the work at that point is going to increase because their schedules become more complicated. Maybe they're pulling employees from other jobs to this one. Additionally, when you let a job in August, you run up against the time clock of the seasons, basically. In wintertime, you can only go so far. The asphalt plants close when you're doing a paving project around November 15th. We've been running up against that deadline, and when a contractor sees that schedule, it's a compressed schedule, and again, the added cost of completing the project at a faster pace is recognized in that point. Not to mention that in our UDO, we reference that best management practices for placing asphalt should stop around September 30th. And we've been going into November consistently over the last couple of years with, well, probably even before that, but consistently beyond that deadline. The problem there is when you're placing asphalt, the reason for that best management practice is there's temperature concerns with placing the product down at temperatures below 45. So there's an added risk there with the material. If you were to let the projects starting from the calendar year in February, we'd be more competitive and in line with other communities letting their projects or even ahead of them, so the contractors would be scheduling their work and including us in that. It'd be more of a normal schedule, and the BMPs, the best management practices for placing the materials would be realized at that point. So those are the three main benefits I've identified for the Public Works Department. And my due diligence as an engineer, if I didn't state that clearly enough, I do have exhibits that kind of outline that process on calendars to take a look at. But, so if you have any questions. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yep.
Actually, I don't know if this is appropriate, but I mean, we've been here for a while, so I want to try to move things forward. This is an issue that, over time, I really haven't had an opinion about. But over the last couple of weeks, I've become convinced, and tonight's discussion convinced me even more, that we need to change the fiscal year. I was opposed to it originally, but in view of tonight's discussion, I want to point out a couple things. Number one, with respect to the timing of our pension due date. You know, we just got our actuarial study, okay, and we're dealing with the next fiscal year. Well, if we were on a January 1st fiscal year, then we're levying in December for the year that starts January 1st. I like that because there's some symmetry there. Second of all, you have more information about some of your large expenses like these pension bills that you wouldn't have in July when you're trying to set your budget. Even though it is for the following July, I think there's just more symmetry. And then the last issue is the fact that you don't have new council members coming on during the middle of the budget cycle. So since your election's in April, the January fiscal year fits a lot better with being able to do a budget cycle that is removed from the election cycle. And it also allows people then to have that determined. There won't be decisions made after the election that people might disagree with. So I think it fits better with the election cycle as well.
And staff was tasked to come up with a couple other reasons why we think it would be better for us as well. I did add a few of those. One is, I think, the city currently has any vacation balances, whatever is allowed to roll over, it's rolled over in December to January. So that liability that we do have to book would be lower, because that is when we're allowed to roll it over. Instead of in June, people have been saving up their vacation, and they will have larger balances, whereas they'll use it throughout the year. So that is also a good thing, not to have a larger liability.
That's a transparency thing, though.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an accounting issue.
Yeah,
but it's
well,
transparency.
Yes, absolutely.
Comments from the committee?
I guess my reluctance originally was largely due to the change in managing the change amongst the rest of what was happening with the accounting changes and fund changes and some of the other things that were going on. And then putting that in the middle of that would even make it more difficult for council and FAC to ensure that we're really following along with what the actual results are and monitoring and our role there. That was my main concern. And that would still be my main concern, is just.
And that
having the
issue doesn't
transition.
go away?
Yeah.
You're correct.
The additional cost for the audit and financial software, how does that relate to the savings with the engineering plan? I mean, what's the payback on that?
With the audit, we're just paying for an additional audit quicker than we normally probably would have. Our audit costs are fairly low. They're like $20,000. We are going to be doing an RFP for that services. Hopefully, that'll even be lower. In that stub year, though, it's a natural, it'll give us a natural bump in our reserves because our revenues are going to naturally be higher than our expenditures based on getting a full year of property taxes.
So, no,
So,
I didn't say it very well. Is the savings, are we going to be saving $20,000 on?
in engineering costs,
I didn't quantify it.
Well,
Actually, let me try to
I'm not,
deal.
you do it better than me.
Yeah, okay. Here's what I see, and I may be wrong, okay? The costs associated with the change will be one-time costs.
I understand that. What's the
Okay.
payback on?
And so the payback, what Director Haley is saying is, it might be $25,000 to $30,000 might be our out-of-pocket cost to change the fiscal year. Correct, is that accurate? Okay, so over time, we have to recover 25 to
Right.
30,000 over time. That could occur in 1 year, but even if it took 10 years, that's only $2,500 that you would have to recover. I don't think the main reason to do it is to save money.
No, I
I
wasn't
think.
suggesting
no,
that.
no,
I
I'm
was just
saying-
questioning what the payback
What I'm
period
saying
was.
is, I think that's an ancillary benefit. I would expect, I mean, if you let a project, what's the average size of your contract?
What we're looking at, it'll probably be around $1 million.
So $1 million, $20,000 would be 2%.
So that might even be 1 year you might
It
save
might-
that.
it-
That was my
rush
question.
premium, a rush premium for getting the work done early? Because as you're
Yes.
saying, if you're paying a premium to crowd that into somebody's schedule, we're asking,
Yeah, and I think that if we change, that's when I'll have the concrete proof of, because we'll be letting in February, and the last project we let in July, so we'll know, unfortunately. Forecasting it, I think we're gonna get better prices in February than we would in late August. I may have bid tabs to support that somewhere downstairs, but I'm confident there'll be savings. I don't know when it will be realized, if it will be 1 year or if it will be 5.
But on $1 million contract, you'd have to save 2%.
That's doable.
Okay, that answers my question.
Do we want to recommend the change in fiscal year? Are we comfortable with that?
when are we talking about it occurring?
so the timeframe we're looking would be to bring this forward, starting this next budget cycle. So we would look at doing a 6-month budget cycle for July to December of 2016. And then we would start our first 12-month calendar budget cycle, January to December 2017. And staff will be starting that budget process January timeframe, so.
But taking Mr. Tarazinski's concern, I want to make sure, we've just had a water capital improvement plan approved, I believe.
Yep.
So, and we had, under the old fiscal year, I mean, we had a system where we were going to be able to monitor the progress with respect to fund balances, et cetera. We need some assurance that the monitoring of the things that have been approved doesn't get lost in the transition.
I don't think that
That's
would be the case
hortatory
at all.
language.
Absolutely. Because I think it becomes a monthly monitoring. Certainly with the budget process, that capital improvement plan is a wonderful tool, but we're also doing monthly monitoring of our expenditures and revenues, even with a 6-month cycle.
Correct, but you're starting your fiscal year at a different point in your revenue cycle. And that can be meaningful in terms of knowing where you're at a given point in time. In other words, early in your fiscal year, you're going to get your Christmas sales tax, which should be relatively high. Now, early in the fiscal year, you're getting the slower summer months. So, I mean, there's going to be some adjustment as to looking at year-to-date figures.
Absolutely. Our biggest fluctuation is property taxes, but I don't see that would be a cash flow problem. We are very heavily based on sales tax, which is a monthly revenue stream, and our sales tax is very flat. We do see a spike at Christmas, which we receive in the month of March, but it's not so much so that we're depending on that cash flow stream.
But food and beverage does move up and down depending on the status of the university, as I recall.
And the weather.
I'm sorry?
And the weather.
Yeah, and the weather.
And the water revenue, I think, is a pretty steady stream because we have the
Okay.
university here. We don't see that slump in the summer because, when the students, or that spike in the summer, it's kind of level all year round, so.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Just a couple of thoughts. If we would move forward with this, I know from a budgetary standpoint and preparing a 5-year financial plan, I think a lot of the comments I made were based upon us doing the analytical work necessary to support any rate increase. And I think we have some foundation for that, but we have not completed that. So in this process, be it a 6-month period or whatever, I would hope that we would be planning on doing a full-year budget for that 6-month cycle and a 5-year financial plan for that cycle, so that we don't lose our impetus on getting that done prior to this next budget process. So I'm hoping, that we can meet in January, February, and take a look at the rate structures at the other university communities to see how much they're actually putting into property tax versus sales tax versus bar and restaurant, and how they're getting at revenues associated with university-type non-property tax-paying entities, so that we can better win some of us over and some of the community over, that there is a comprehensive look at that to make sure that we're on the same page. And in doing that, I think a 5-year financial plan is what one of our key objectives has been, and that we would publish that as part of our budget cycle. So that would help in the monitoring, as far as I'm concerned, and make me more comfortable as well. And I would hope that would be part of our plan. Would that be?
So we've already started the fact gathering, because it's a lot of work, gathering all, trying to do a comprehensive look at all of our fees and revenues, and with our comparables with university towns, to show a true picture of the city in comparison of those university towns and comparables, along with trying to generate a document in our budget, which is part of GFOA's best practices, to show a one-step fee schedule. It might not even be on one page, it might be a couple pages, but of what our fee structures are that are incorporated into that budget book. So that is our intention, absolutely.
Including a 5-year
That
budget?
5-year, I think, is it's a given. I think it's part of one of our financial policies, so.
Okay.
What's your preference? Do we want to make a recommendation?
That's what you're asking for.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
I'll motion.
Okay. Do we have a second? I think we really have to vote on this, guys. I mean, we can vote it down, but I really
second
think
it.
that we need to vote on it.
I'll second it then.
Okay. All those in favor of recommending a change in the fiscal year from July 1, June 30th to January 1, December 31st, raise your hand. All in favor? Okay. All opposed? Well, you got it. Can't abstain.
You can't
have to- Have to choose. And
It's halfway
And-
up. All right,
Would you-
I'll say okay.
You say okay?
Yeah.
okay, so three,
Three, two.
3-2. I mean, there's a difference of opinion. Okay, I mean, the committee is not convinced of the efficacy, but I would say that there's not a strong feeling either in favor or against. They're just, is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. Okay, now I think, are there other items? I'm sorry? Yeah, no, I've forgotten that. Okay, public participation. Is there anyone from the audience who would like to address the council?
I'll have it knowing, I mean, since
Okay.
we didn't budget properly, as a city last year, I have to look in February, so I'll have the data.
And I'm glad to see that more of the members are more actively involved. I enjoy hearing your input. That helps me as a citizen to understand better what it is that's going on. Keep in mind two things, from my humble opinion. The long-range planning is a top priority. There's absolutely no question about it. The other thing that goes right along with it, and that's something that many of you expressed as far as what has to be proven to the public, and that is a good look at evaluating operating costs and cutting the expenses. That has to be done very aggressively. That is what people, if you talk to anyone, just go down the street and talk to folks. You gotta cut back, you gotta cut back, you gotta cut back. We're not cutting back as much as we probably should. I have a question which I'll save for last, because I don't even know if this question can be answered, but it's something to think about. But one other comment. I'm disappointed. I don't think it's a good idea to change the fiscal year at all. There are too many things up in the air, the long-range plan, all this stuff that staff has to do to pull the information together. You're missing a member. I really do not think that is a good idea. Too much energy is going into that rather than, you want me to sing? No. That'll clear the hall. Too much is going on and too many other things have a priority rather than changing the fiscal year. It's too much going on. It's not the good thing to do. It'll make it hard to compare. It'll make it hard to compare. And here's my question, and again, I don't know if this is answerable or not, is the EAV, from the opinion here, and this is maybe something we can ponder, is the fact that the EAV is going down, is that going to stabilize, and is that a good thing? Once, when the EAV was higher, was that an inflated kind of a thing, and were we living in a dream world? Is it a good thing that the EAV is down? I don't know. And how does that impact us in Illinois?
Well, Betsy, the EAV has already begun to stabilize. In DeKalb County, they use a 3-year average of their studies to be able to come up with what your EAV will be in a given year without a reassessment. And that has begun to stabilize. We saw a much smaller drop in EAV, and in the presentation that was made, I think, last time, but if not, during the budget presentations, you can see that it's beginning to stabilize. As to whether that's a good thing or not, I think that's probably a multifaceted answer. On the one hand, if your EAV is truly reflecting what's going on in your housing market, if people's wages are not declining or their income is not declining as fast as the EAV, that can make your housing more affordable. Okay, so that's on the positive side. On the negative side, what we have seen is that there are a lot of people who have been trapped in their houses because they're underwater, because the value of the house has dropped in such a way that they can't sell it, and it's not a matter of making a profit, it's being able to pay their mortgage off once they sell it. So, almost all of the fiscal things that have gone on in local government are dependent upon an increasing economic value, and improving economy. The property tax extension limitation law was passed in a time when property values were increasing relatively quickly. Those laws don't work well in down times, and that's part of the problem that we've had in the state of Illinois. There have been some suggestions as to how to alleviate that. So, it depends on what side of the market there is. There are pluses and minuses to the market adjustment. In DeKalb, the amount of the drop in EAV that was due to a housing bubble, there might have been a little bit, but I have not perceived that most of the drop was because of a housing bubble, but rather just a general decline in the economy. It wasn't that houses were overvalued necessarily, but that the economy was strong enough to support an ever-increasing market price. But our values didn't go up as fast as some of the areas east of us. And so it was somewhat surprising that our values actually decreased faster than some of the areas to the east of us. That's a long-winded answer, but the first part is definitive that it is stabilizing, and there is evidence. The second part is a mixed message as to whether it's good or bad. Other people care to comment? Anybody? Ellen?
I was just going to point out, and you might help me with this, it's a complicated formula, because at the end of the day, all the taxing bodies do the extension. They ask for a certain dollar amount, and that's your numerator. And then the valuation of all the properties in the community is the denominator. And the rate can raise, but the tax paid by each household stays the same because of the relative change in that interplay between numerator and denominator.
Right, for the extension limitation, that is correct. The limit is on what can be extended. And it does not, it doesn't cap anybody's individual taxes. It does cap the extension as a whole. But there are things, for example, the school district is subject to the property tax extension limitation law, but if you have a referendum for debt, which they did, they can increase their extension beyond what would be allowed by the limitation law because of the authority that they have been given for borrowing.
My point is that the EAV, the rate is relative. The EAV can go down and the rate number goes up because of that numerator denominator, but you're still
Right.
paying the same amount of tax.
That's true.
But the underlying property has a lower value if you're trying
So
to
it's a
market
higher
it.
rate applied against a lower valued property.
That's
To give you the same
correct.
number at the
And-
end of the day.
And so from the easiest way to think about it is I'll actually give an example so that, people realize that I am trying to be balanced here. In Massachusetts, when they capped their property taxes, and they capped the rate, we cap an extension. They capped the rate at 2.5% of market value, okay? And when my residence was being assessed at approximately 1% of market value. Right now, in DeKalb, the rate is about 4.3, 4.4% of market value is what the rate is, the combined rate of all the jurisdictions. That is very high, and that can be a disincentive to people because as a proportion of their income and as a proportion of the value of their house, our rates are high.
At the risk of your wrath once more.
No,
Same set of folks, the Tax Foundation and the Taxpayers Federation of Illinois has a color-coded map of the counties by property tax rate. DeKalb County comes in on the high end of the property tax rates in the state of Illinois.
that's right. And they have for a while. Yep, absolutely. No question about that.
And Zillow doesn't say nice things about the outlook for next year either.
Yeah. Other comments from the audience? Okay. We need to confirm next meeting date and time. Do we have an agenda for our next meeting?
No.
Okay,
I guess
I-
it would be first part of the year.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So let's not
Right.
try to confirm the date and
Okay.
time at this point in time. And as we did tonight, we tried to make sure that everybody could make it before we scheduled the meeting. And unfortunately, we had one person's schedule who would not allow, and one person whose health, as I understand it. Anyway, we had two people, we had two people who could not attend, but we will make every effort to try to get everybody here for the next meeting. I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.